The next steps. Lawmakers debate whether there should be another round of coronavirus relief. Lifting restrictions. Italy's prime minister prepares to ease the lockdown there, why his plan has angered Catholic leaders. The grace of obedience. Pope Francis asked the faithful for help in making sure the pandemic does not return. And conquering coronavirus. An EWTN host tells us about her new book helping people overcome fears from COVID-19. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, April 28th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight, President Donald Trump says a number of states are moving to safely and quickly reopen. He met today with Florida's governor and tweeted that Texas will open businesses in phases starting Friday. At the same time, the president is warning that the U.S. may see 70,000 deaths due to the coronavirus, 10,000 more than earlier predicted. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports remotely.
Tracy, President Trump has been trying to reopen the country. Tonight, there are signs that is happening, albeit cautiously.
President Trump meets with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Testing is going very well, but this is a good example of a partnership between the federal government and a state government.
The meeting comes as more open for business signs go up, like in Washington State, where fishing, hunting, and golfing can resume on May 5th.
But if this virus were to spring back, we might have to roll back some of these measures again, which is the reason we have to remain disciplined in how we do enjoy the great outdoors.
A critical component to reopening, testing.
Our blueprint describes how states should unlock their full capacity, expand the number of testing platforms, establish monitoring systems to detect local outbreaks, and conduct contact tracing.
In Texas, they're recruiting.
As part of the effort, Harris County will recruit around 300 contact tracers with the ability to expand as needed.
Meanwhile, the economic pain. In March, sales of new and existing homes plummeted, and U.S. consumer confidence plunged in April.
We're going to have the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression.
One key to opening the economy, opening schools.
I think you'll see a lot of schools open up, even if it's for a very short period of time. I think it would be a good thing.
Meanwhile, the president retweeting a memorandum from the Attorney General's office, reminding states even during the COVID-19 battle, the First Amendment prohibits discrimination against religious institutions and religious believers. And over New York, the Blue Angels soar to say thank you to healthcare workers.
The Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds, quite a sight, no doubt about that. Also tonight, business groups are pushing Congress to protect them from potential lawsuits from customers and workers who might get infected with the coronavirus in their establishments. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting tonight. House Democrats reverse course and announce a schedule change. They no longer plan for the House to return for regular business next Monday. Meanwhile, Senate leadership maintains the upper chamber will be back to work as usual on May 4th. Correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, that's right, Tracy. It was just this morning that the House had actually planned to meet this Monday, but after speaking with the Capitol Physician's Office, the House Majority Leader, Congressman Hoyer, decided to change his mind. Now, the Senate is still planning to meet on Monday, and the top item on the Senator's agenda is another coronavirus relief bill.
The House will be in order.
Even as the Capitol remains largely empty, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer push for financial help for hard-hit states and cities in the next coronavirus relief bill.
We're going to make sure, absolutely sure, that a robust state and local appropriation is made in the next in CARES 2 bill.
But Majority Leader Mitch McConnell warns after the $2 trillion CARES Act, followed by $500 billion in additional funds passed last week, the Senate is not in a rush to spend more money. The bipartisan National Governors Association wrote to congressional leadership, asking Congress to, quote, retroactively amend the CARES Act to ensure flexibility to allow for lost revenue necessary for state governments to function. Leader McConnell then said states with budget woes should have the option of filing for bankruptcy protection. New York's governor shot back.
Pass the law, I dare you. And then go to the president and say, sign this bill allowing states to declare bankruptcy. You want to send a signal to the markets that this nation is in real trouble?
But former Florida Governor Senator Rick Scott says the majority leader has a point.
We've sent money to the states, and we've said, we're going to help you with your coronavirus costs. And I think that's the right thing to do. But you've got to figure out as a governor how to allocate your dollars.
Senate Republicans are expected to stand firm against any new funding bill anytime soon. EWTN will continue to stay on top of the issue. Tracy.
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Eric. Turkey is sending a plane load of personal protective equipment to the United States. A Turkish cargo plane was loaded with medical equipment earlier today. It is carrying 500,000 surgical masks, 500 gallons of disinfectant, and 1,500 goggles. The plane took off from an airbase near the capital of Ankara. People across the United Kingdom held a 1 minute of silence today to honor the doctors and nurses who have died during the coronavirus pandemic. From Edinburgh, Scotland, to ambulance drivers in London and air rescue crews in Glasgow, the British people observed the minute of silence for more than 100 healthcare workers who got sick and passed away from COVID-19. Another European country is easing lockdown restrictions starting on Friday.
Wir können diese Ausgangsbeschränkungen.
Austria's health minister announcing the lifting of quarantine rules as of May 1st, when people will be able to go outside. But officials stress people who do not live together must still practice social distancing. And on May 15th, churches, restaurants and schools in Austria will reopen, followed 2 weeks later by hotels, zoos and swimming pools. Brazil's Supreme Court has rejected an effort to legalize some abortions. A proposal would have decriminalized abortion for mothers diagnosed with the Zika virus. Abortion is illegal in Brazil, but previous Supreme Court rulings have declared it a non-punishable crime in some cases. And it appears that Brazil is now becoming the next global hotspot for the coronavirus pandemic. A hospital outside of Rio de Janeiro is treating about 300 patients with COVID-19 every day. Last Friday, the hospital had to double the number of deaths than average. The president of Brazil has been strongly criticized for not taking seriously the coronavirus pandemic. Italy is preparing for the second phase of easing Europe's longest nationwide coronavirus lockdown. Starting May 4th, factories, construction sites and parks will reopen. Italians will be able to visit family and exercise outside, respecting social distancing. However, Italian bishops are not happy that churches will remain closed, with the exception of funerals of up to 15 people in attendance. Andrea Gagliarducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News, joins us now from Rome by Skype. Andrea, welcome to the show again.
Thank you for having me.
Andrea, what is the Italian bishop's criticism, and then what is the Italian government's response?
Well, Italian bishops criticized the government decision not to allow the celebration of public masses with the audience, masses with people, in the last provisions, because during the last 2 weeks there have been ongoing negotiations between the Italian Bishops' Conference and the government. Italian Bishops' Conference just accepted all the measures of the government. They did not even ask to respect the freedom of worship because they understood that it was an emergency situation. But it was an emergency situation, and when the phase 2 of the response to coronavirus was approaching, the bishops started an ongoing negotiations. And they had promises from the government. They said, well, we're going step by step to allow again people to gather to Mass. But this didn't happen. They said that until May 18th, the masses will not be possible with public again. And so the bishops criticized the decision, and they said it's an attack to the freedom of worship. It's the first time ever they take this stance, but it's because there was a sort of breach in the negotiations. The government said, well, let's talk about that. Now negotiations have been restored. Perhaps there will be, masses will be allowed 1 week in advance, perhaps in May the 10th, but still we don't know.
Andrea, why do you think the Italian Bishops' Conference is reacting now and not when the government banned religious services early on in March?
Well, as I said, because they wanted to accept all the decisions with sense of responsibility. And I also think that they thought that this situation was going to be shorter than what expected. Actually, it was, in my view, a mistake because you need at least to have a formal recognition of the freedom of worship. There have been other negotiations in other countries where the freedom of worship was formally recognized, and then the churches did not allow so many people to get into to go to the masses. So there was some possibility, but the Italian bishops decided to appeal totally to the Italian government as a sign of mutual trust, I would say. Now they come now, and it's kind of late.
Can you talk about the relationship between the Vatican and the Italian government?
Well, as you know, Italy has a concordate with the Holy See. In fact, it's astonishing that the Holy See did not speak. The Holy See just left the Italian bishops to have the negotiations with the government. But actually, there is a concordate, and this concordate, which was signed back in 1929 and then was revisioned and amended in 1984, so it's kind of a modern agreement. It also includes the freedom of worship. So no state can tell the church not to have public gatherings. There is not a possibility. The freedom of worship is not just the freedom of the priest to celebrate Mass, but it's also the freedom of people to go to the Masses, to go to the places of worship, which was affected in these measures anti-coronavirus. The relation has always been kind of good, with some ups and downs, I would say. Mostly now the negotiations, the talks are based on family issues, economic issues, and less on the principles.
Andrea, quickly, we don't have a lot of time, but I'm wondering, do you think we can expect some churches in Italy to reopen by May 4th?
I don't think so at the moment. As I said, we're expecting it for May 10th in this moment. But actually, the churches are open. It's just impossible to go to the churches or to go without a reason. And one of the motives, among the motives, is not included the possibility to pray. You need to find an excuse.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us and your time. Please stay safe. Andrea Gagliarducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Coming up, how the coronavirus pandemic is affecting Catholic funerals. Well, tonight we examine one of the more sensitive and troubling impacts of social distancing amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the loss of the traditional ways that we, the faithful, gather to pay our respects to and bury those who have died. Robert Seelig, CEO of Catholic Funeral and Cemetery Services, joins us now by Skype to talk more about this. Robert, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, Robert, I know it's really hard to imagine not being able to be with a loved one who is sick and dying. However, unfortunately, now is a reality for so many people going through the pandemic and the social distancing part of it. It also must be incredibly hard for you trying to console them. Can you talk about that? And what do you say to those who are grieving?
Well, I think, first, I work for an organization called Catholic Funeral and Cemetery Services. We were founded at the request of bishops around the United States, really with the idea that we would just bring love and reconciliation to families at a time of loss when they lose a loved one. And so with the pandemic, it actually just broke some of the traditions and bonds that we had that make it even harder on the caregivers, those that are the first responders at the cemeteries and funeral homes. So we've had to become creative in the way that we've approached trying to break through and embrace families when we can't touch or feel them, in kind of the way that we have traditionally.
I know that public vigils and funeral masses and committals are really traditional and important for us to honor and mourn our loved ones. How are the faithful having to adapt now, and what's your industry doing to help them?
Well, the first thing, we kind of had like three priorities when we looked at the response to the virus and how it was impacting us. First, funeral homes and parishes had to close their operations from the standpoint that they could not conduct services typically in the traditional manner. So the cemetery all of a sudden became the focal point, and shelter-in-place rules required that families reduced the number down to 10 or less to come to the cemetery. So what was traditionally a vigil and a funeral mass all of a sudden became condensed into a committal service, which is just really actually the final commendation for family where prayers are shared. And in many cases, families were not allowed to get out of cars, or they may not even be able to be present due to the coronavirus and the impact on everyone. So the first priority was just safety for families and for workers. And then it was really trying to figure out how we could be present and allow families to connect. And so the implementation of live streaming became our quickest way to connect family members that couldn't be present, or even to just record the moment for families to share with others.
I was going to ask you about that, the use of technology. Are there any other uses of technology that you're incorporating now to help others?
Well, I think, when you talk about technology, everybody's been seeing that parishes are using live streaming. At the cemeteries, it became a little bit more complicated because not only did we live stream, but then we actually had those moments where you wanted to help do consoling. And so we started a pastoral program where we actually have priests, chaplains, even cemetery staff just reaching out and calling families and setting up, FaceTime and other vehicles with technology just to connect face to face with people, making arrangements, needed to be done face to face, but from afar. And so all of a sudden you have multiple moments where you're connecting with families, not just the one moment when they come to the cemetery, but just this ongoing planning that goes on during the pandemic.
Robert, I'm curious, is there still an opportunity for folks, if they want to have a memorial mass for a loved one at a later date, would they still be able to do that?
Yes. Yeah. And that's really what families are doing right now is every family that we serve, we're setting up an appointment to contact them and have a memorial mass said after the fact. In fact, what we do know is that a lot of families that are choosing cremation are not necessarily having even the remains interred in the cemetery because it's not safe to go out. And so we know that we're going to have a series of families coming forward that would like to connect with their parish and with the cemetery and the funeral staff. So we actually expect a deluge of those services. And I've actually had a lot of priests that have volunteered and said, if priests are not available, we stand ready to help families through a difficult time.
Robert, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your insight about this topic for us. We really appreciate it. Robert Seelig, CEO of Catholic Funeral and Cemetery Services. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
Up next, EWTN's Teresa Tomeo tells us how to remain strong during the quarantine. And Pope Francis reminds the faithful of the importance of being obedient. Pope Francis asked the faithful to follow instructions when the coronavirus quarantine measures are lifted.
La verità è chiara, è trasparente.
At his daily mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father asked for the grace to be obedient as restrictions are lifted, saying we must do our part to make sure the pandemic does not return. Pope Francis also reminds us to avoid gossip and condemning others, and instead to focus on what is true and good. A new book is helping the faithful to navigate the challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic and inspiring hope in the process. Written by EWTN's own Teresa Tomeo, Conquering Coronavirus, How Faith Can Put Your Fears to Rest, offers advice on a number of topics related to the pandemic. And Teresa Tomeo joins me now on Skype to talk more about her new book. Teresa, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Great to see you, too, and happy Easter, and thank you for this opportunity, Tracy. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're so glad you're here. So the title of your new book is inspirational, of course, in and of itself. How can we use our faith, Teresa, to help strengthen us during this time?
Well, I really think it's an opportune time, and I love the verse, and I talk about this in the book, Tracy, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. I like to look at the glass always as half full versus half empty, and what really has been coming to me in prayer, especially after losing a loved one during this pandemic, not from COVID-19, but during this whole situation, is that God allows these things to happen and puts us in situations that we can use to help other people. And so my whole idea of doing this book was to inspire people to learn from this experience. Whatever we're going through, we're all going through particular trials, whether it be maybe our health, maybe finances. But what is God trying to do right now in our homes, in our lives, in the domestic church, and in the world? And how can we make a difference? And, you know, being a newscaster as you are and being a talk show host as I am, we have a very unique view on the world, and we get to interview a lot of really wonderful people who are doing wonderful things for God and his church. And I want us to remember this. And so I decided to put not only resources and prayers and reflection questions, but I wanted to put a lot of the great stories that we've been sharing on EWTN, on my radio show, on television, on the National Catholic Register website, all the great resources we have. And many of them I've come across. So I tried to compile some really inspirational stories to remember this, remember what we're going through, and not forget and learn and grow from it. But it can be used as a family study, because there's questions at the end of each chapter. There's prayers for all different types of groups of people that may be struggling. So it's basically, I think, a one-stop shopping book of what we're all experiencing right now.
Well, Teresa, you just mentioned some of the stories. You have a story. You talked briefly about your mom, losing your mom to congestive heart failure during the pandemic. I can't imagine that must have been so hard for you. And if you don't mind, can you talk about that experience for you?
Yeah, it was a very difficult time, especially because she was lived for 2 years in a beautiful assisted living facility that was just always filled with activities and things going on, and Bible studies and prayer groups and wonderful parties. And then when the COVID-19 hit, of course, they were among the first, as it should be because of the contagion factor, they shut down. And so it went from being this place of lively activity and full of life to basically being very, very quiet and almost austere in some ways. And I was with her right when she was dying, and it was actually on St. Patrick's Day, where I had a very unique experience where some neighbors in the community came by and were doing window visits. And that really lifted my spirits. And I began to notice all around us that these different types of things were happening with people who were shut-ins, or the elderly, or families who couldn't come outside, or people were visiting in unique ways. It was a very profound experience also, Tracy, not to be able to have the funeral liturgy for her, which is very powerful, as we know. I have a wonderful pastor who was with us when my father died 10 years ago. We had a beautiful Catholic funeral mass. And we couldn't do that for my mom this time. We had the graveside committal, the Christian committal. We had a very, very small private viewing at the funeral home. And so there was a lot that I had to surrender. And so I feel that God allowed me to go through that experience to share and maybe feel empathy for people who are having similar experiences. And also for even, I think, creating in my heart a deeper and a stronger love for our faith and the beauty of what we do in the Catholic Church, especially the dignity of the human person, from conception until natural death, and how the whole idea of someone passing on to the next life to be with the Lord, that liturgy that send-off that we give them, is so powerful. And I learned a lot through that experience, and I wanted to share it and be very transparent with people.
Oh, it is wonderful, Teresa. I can't wait to read it. Speaking of your book, what do you hope readers take away from it? And also, when can we get the book?
The book's available right now thanks to the amazing team at Sophia Institute Press, who turned it around very quickly. You have a wonderful team, as you well know, at Sophia. It is available on their website. They have a special link, sophiainstitute.com/Teresa. You can also get it through my website and, of course, the EWTN Religious Catalog. My website is just teresatomeo.com, and it's in the book section. But really what I hope people walk away with is that we can't forget what we're going through right now, what we've learned, how we're growing, and that God, regardless of how difficult the situations are, whether it's a pandemic, God forbid, I hope there's not another one in our lifetime, whether it's a personal crisis, that God is there with us through it all. And so I hope at the end of the day, we don't forget what happened and we learn from it and we help others learn too.
Well, Teresa, thank you so much. So great talking with you. Teresa Tomeo, author of Conquering Coronavirus and host of EWTN's Catholic View for Women, as well as the daily morning radio program, Catholic Connection. Thanks again, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you, and God bless your work. Keep it up.
And a reminder, EWTN broadcasts Mass throughout the day. Mass airs at 8 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. Eastern. We're also showing the Pope's daily Mass and other special programming throughout the day. And we also have Eucharistic adoration from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on our website, EWTN.com. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.